The wind cut through the jagged hills of New Mexico territory like a knife, carrying dust and memories that no one alive wanted to remember. Gideon Callaway sat on the porch of his weathered cabin, shotgun resting across his knees, eyes tracing the horizon. 12 years. That's how long it had been since he'd let anyone close, since the war had bled out more than just the land. It had bled into his soul. And then she came. From the tree line, a figure stumbled, barefoot, her dress nothing more than a tattered curtain, stained by blood and earth. The afternoon sun glinted off the bruises on her arms, her legs, the scarred canvas of a body that had been broken and rebuilt in ways no one should endure. Her hair, matted with grime and sweat, clung to her face. Her eyes, green, sharp, but hollow, locked onto him for just a fraction of a second before sliding away, as if daring the world to touch her again. Please, don't. The words barely carried on the wind, a whisper that trembled with fear. Gideon froze. She wasn't bleeding much on the surface, but her frame shook like a candle in a storm. He didn't step forward too fast. He had learned the hard way that trust had a cost, and she looked like she had already paid it in full. Then the tattered cloth slipped, and his stomach turned. Her back, twisted burns, raised welts, jagged scars carved with symbols that spoke of pain and cruelty. Letters etched as if someone had tried to write ownership across her flesh. He swallowed hard, the bitter taste of memory rising in his throat. Clara Mayfield. That's what he'd later learn her name was. But at that moment, she was just a shadow, trembling in the sun. Gideon's mind raced, catching echoes of Tennessee, the war, the girl he once couldn't save. He had walked away then. He swore never again. Slowly, he removed his coat, heavy and sun-bleached, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The motion was deliberate, careful. Not a question, not a demand, just action. She flinched once, then allowed herself to be covered. He didn't ask for her story, not yet. Words could crush fragile bones faster than bullets. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her into the cabin that smelled of pine smoke and old regrets. Inside, he laid her on the cot along the back wall. The night air outside carried a chill that would have been insignificant to most, but to her, it must have felt like frost on fire. Gideon built a small fire in the stove. The sound of it crackling filled the cabin, a heartbeat in the silence. She watched, head bowed, silent as a grave. He brewed coffee, bitter and dark, a ritual that gave his hands purpose while he observed her without touching. Hours passed. Her eyes flickered toward him once, just once, then away, a fragile, fleeting acknowledgement of existence. Morning arrived with hesitant light. Clara's lips moved for the first time, barely audible. Water. He handed her a cup, careful not to startle her. She drank slowly, deliberately, gripping the cup like a lifeline. And in that act, Gideon felt it, a spark of life that refused to be snuffed out. One word, one sip, one silent declaration. I'm still here. But Gideon knew that word, that simple gesture, would ignite a storm that no cabin, no shotgun, no measure of silence could ever contain. She didn't speak much the next day, head down, eyes darting at the slightest sound, nods, short replies, careful glances. He let her be. He had learned the art of patience the hard way, in trenches, in bloodied fields, in a life that demanded solitude. Yet by afternoon, something shifted. Clara stepped outside, sitting on the porch beside him. For long minutes, neither spoke. Then, almost in confession to the wind, They used to make me polish their boots. Gideon carved the wood silently. He didn't flinch, didn't even look up, just a slow nod. They had a camp, she continued, voice low. Not on any map. A place where men worked people until the flesh tore. I ran twice. First time, they broke my nose. Second time, they carved my back like it was leather. Third time, I ran again. Her words stopped. Her breath hitched. He did not ask how. Some stories required stronger days, safer spaces, trust, earned slowly, not demanded. The sun began to dip behind the hills when Gideon's ears caught it. Hooves, fast, heavy, rising from the ridge road. He moved first, shotgun in hand, motioning her inside. Her body stiffened, yet she obeyed like she had been trained to survive each threat with caution. The man who appeared didn't ride like a cowboy. No, this one wore fine clothes, grease-stained vest, hair slicked over a cruel smile. "Clara Mayfield," he called. "One chance. Come back quietly, or it'll be worse." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "She's not going anywhere." The man spat into the dirt, smirk fading only slightly. "Ain't your choice, old-timer?" He turned, urging his horse forward. His gaze lingered on her as he left, a warning clear as the dust cloud trailing behind him. "We'll be back, and not alone." Gideon said nothing. Sat, waited, watched the horizon as the shadows lengthened. That night, he scribbled a note to an old friend, a man who carried a badge and conscience alike. "If you're listening, you know me well enough. This isn't a simple call for help." And just like that, the stage was set. 3 days of uneasy quiet followed, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every sound a threat. Gideon stayed close, never straying far from the door, cleaning his shotgun with deliberate care. Clara remained near, silent, but her presence no longer felt like a ghost. Then, late in the afternoon, the ridge road spoke again. 3 riders, not farmers, not lawmen, men who believed fear was power. Gideon stepped to the doorway, Clara just behind him. The lead rider barked, voice sharp. "Step aside, old man." Gideon didn't move, shotgun across his lap, not aimed, but heavy with warning. A second hand hovered near the belt. Reflexes learned in blood, and war guided his actions. One shot rang out. The man dropped, a crimson stain spreading across dry dirt. The other 2 froze, then retreated. From the tree line, a calm, commanding voice called, "I'd think real hard about your next move." Sheriff Tobias Harlan stepped out, rifle slung low, badge gleaming faintly in the dim light. "This is my jurisdiction. She's under my protection now." The remaining men melted into dust and distance, leaving only the echo of what could have been. Later, in the quiet cabin, Gideon and Clara sat across from each other. She still flinched at shadows, at wind, at memories, but she no longer shrank from the fire. The coffee she drank slowly, the little tasks she performed, stacking wood, sweeping the porch, became a rhythm, a quiet reclamation of life. One evening, a basket of wildflowers appeared on the windowsill. Gideon said nothing, yet the next day he swept the porch clean for the first time in years. No words, no declarations of love, just small acts, small healing. And in a rare moment over stew and bitter coffee, Clara asked, voice low, contemplative, "Do you think some people exist not to save others, but to give them space to save themselves?" Gideon nodded, because sometimes the right words could do more harm than good. If you're still with us, hit the like button and subscribe, because in the hills of New Mexico, the story has only begun. This story will take you deeper into Gideon and Clara's world, where survival, secrets, and redemption collide. The morning sun burned weakly through a thin veil of clouds, painting the New Mexico hills in pale gold. Gideon Callaway moved silently around the cabin, tending to the horses and checking traps, each motion precise, deliberate. Clara Mayfield had emerged from the corner of the room where she'd spent most nights awake, watching the shadows, listening for danger. Today, she stepped outside fully, letting the warm wind brush her hair against her scarred shoulders. "Where do you go every day?" she asked, her voice low, cautious. Gideon didn't answer immediately. His eyes tracked the ridges, calculating, remembering every contour of the land. "Making sure this place doesn't become a coffin," he said finally. Simple, dry, like dust on the floor. She nodded, accepting it. Words could be dangerous. Silence, safer. By noon, the ridge road whispered again. Not a lone rider this time, but 3 shadows galloping fast, dust trailing like smoke behind them. Clara stiffened, muscles coiled. Gideon's hand went to the shotgun, but he didn't raise it yet. He watched them approach, gauging, reading the rhythm of their horses' hooves like a heartbeat of a predator. Silas Granger, Clara muttered under her breath. Her eyes flicked to Gideon. He's coming back. Gideon nodded. I know. The first man appeared over the ridge, leather gloves tight around the reins, his expression cruel. The second shifted uneasily, glancing at his companion, uncertain. Silas, in the middle, smirked with practiced menace. Callaway, he called, voice carrying across the hills. You've taken what's mine. That girl belongs elsewhere. Gideon's lips pressed into a thin line. She belongs where she wants, not where men like you decide. The wind picked up, throwing dust in their faces, masking movements. The men hesitated. Behind them, Clara's fingers tightened around the coat Gideon had given her. Fear lingered in her posture, but there was defiance too. She had survived worse. She would survive this. A shot rang out, deliberate, warning. It cut through the air, sharp as broken glass. None of the riders flinched, but the second man's jaw tightened. He knew Gideon had no hesitation, that he would use that weapon if pushed. Before the standoff could escalate further, a new presence announced itself. From a rocky outcrop to the east, a rider emerged, steady, composed. Sheriff Tobias Harlan, badge glinting faintly under the high sun, eyes scanning each man. You're trespassing, Granger, he said, voice calm, but carrying the authority of a man who had survived more than anyone should. Step off, or it won't be just your pride that's damaged. Silas cursed under his breath. He spat into the dirt, hatred flickering across his face. You always ruin the fun, Harlan. Clara's heart thudded. She had not expected salvation to ride in like this. A friend from the past, someone who carried the weight of law and justice, ready to enforce it. She realized slowly that Gideon had allies, that the past he bore did not leave him entirely alone. The men retreated, but not without a promise. Silas's eyes locked on Clara. This isn't over, girl. You'll wish you'd stayed in the dirt. And just like that, dust swallowed them, leaving only silence in their wake. Inside the cabin, Clara finally spoke of the camp she'd escaped. Her voice was hesitant, fractured, like a river trying to flow over jagged rocks. They kept us in cages sometimes. Not metal. No, holes in the ground, shallow, dark. We had names, but not really. Just numbers, reminders that we were replaceable. They'd beat you until you thought running wasn't possible. Gideon listened without interruption, letting her words hang between them. He poured 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for him, handing hers across the table. She didn't sip immediately, fingers brushing the cup like it might burn. How did you survive? He asked finally, though he already knew the answer. Sheer will and a luck that had abandoned many. I don't know, she whispered. I wanted it more than they did. It was the first time she had looked at him fully, not with suspicion or fear, but recognition, perhaps of shared pain, perhaps of someone who could understand brokenness without needing to fix it. Over the next few days, the cabin became a sanctuary of fragile routines. Gideon repaired the fence line, checked the traps, and hunted small game. Clara helped when she could, fetching water, tending a fire, stacking wood. No words of gratitude were exchanged. Silence was their language, but the peace was deceptive. One night, as Gideon stoked the stove, Clara moved closer, her voice low, almost lost in the crackle of fire. I think they know someone's watching. That's why. They'll come back. Gideon's jaw tightened. Then we make sure, when they do, they regret it. The next day, as the wind shifted from the west, signs appeared. Hoofprints, scorched brush, a discarded glove. Clara followed him silently, learning to read the land as Gideon did, noting danger, calculating distance. She was becoming more than a survivor. She was becoming an apprentice of vigilance. Late that afternoon, a lone rider appeared, hesitant, scanning the hills. Not Silas, not his men. Tobias Harlan. His horse slowed as he approached the cabin. Callaway, he said, dismounting smoothly. I heard from an old friend. Told me things are heating up. You might need some extra eyes. Gideon nodded. He didn't need to explain. Harlan knew. Together, they checked the perimeter, marking escape routes, planning contingencies. Clara watched, learning quickly, no longer entirely helpless. The bond forming between them was quiet but unspoken, a fragile trust growing in a world where trust was a dangerous currency. Night fell heavy and still. Clara stayed near the door, listening to the wind and the faint rustle of trees. Gideon cleaned his weapons, checking each barrel, each trigger, as if the act could ward off the inevitable confrontation. Then, hours later, the ridge whispered again. 3 shadows materialized, faster, harder, more deliberate. Silas and his men had returned, and this time there was no hesitation in their eyes. "Get her!" Silas barked. "No tricks, Callaway!" Gideon stepped forward, shotgun leveled. But before he could act, Clara moved. Not away, not hiding, forward, hands steady, eyes sharp. "You're not taking me," she said, voice clear, cutting through the night air. Gideon felt something stir inside him. A flicker of hope mingled with fear. She was not just surviving, she was fighting. He realized then that the past 12 years, the regrets, the ghosts he carried, they had prepared him for this. But she had prepared herself. A volley of shots rang out as the first man lunged. Gideon fired once. The second fell. Tobias's rifle cracked, precise, halting the advance. Clara ducked instinctively, then rose, moving toward cover with a calm that belied her history. By the time the dust settled, the intruders were gone, leaving only footprints and the faint tang of fear in the air. Clara exhaled, finally, allowing herself to relax, though only slightly. "Didn't know you had it in you," Gideon said quietly, voice low, more to himself than her. She glanced up, a faint shadow of a smile playing on her lips. "Didn't know you'd let anyone scare you," she replied. The fire crackled between them, filling the cabin with warmth and life. The events of the night left them both exhausted, yet alive. Their trust and bond deepened. It was a small victory, but in the New Mexico hills, small victories were survival. If you're still following Gideon and Clara's story, hit the like button now and subscribe, because the next part will push them to their limits. Secrets, betrayals, and a final confrontation are coming, and you won't want to miss a single moment. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks when Gideon Callaway stirred. Clara was already awake, crouched near the window, eyes tracing the horizon. The air smelled of pine resin and the distant burn of campfires. Warning signs, though she didn't say it aloud. Gideon stepped lightly, not wanting to startle her. "You think they'll come back?" he asked, voice low, carrying the weight of countless fears. Clara didn't answer immediately. She had learned to measure her words like bullets, precise and lethal if misused. "They will," she said finally. "And next time, they won't wait until night." Gideon nodded. 12 years of solitude had taught him one thing. Every fight carried its price, and sometimes survival meant embracing that price. He loaded his rifle, checked the shotgun, and tightened the straps on his coat. Clara mirrored him silently, picking up the hunting knife Gideon had shown her how to use, its blade gleaming cold in the early light. By midday, the ridge was restless. The distant hooves warned of their return. Gideon and Clara moved like shadows, scanning every dip in the earth, every tree line, knowing Silas Granger wouldn't waste a moment. But this time, they weren't alone. Tobias Harlan had arrived hours earlier, scouting the paths where the enemy could emerge. "You ready for what comes next?" Tobias asked, voice steady, practiced. Gideon didn't answer with words. He simply nodded and motioned for Clara to follow him toward the western ridge, where the canyon narrowed and offered natural cover. Hours passed, tension coiling tight around them like a rope. Then came the telltale sound, the snap of branches, hooves drumming like war drums. Silas and his men had returned, this time with more riders, more fire in their eyes. The sun glinted off polished pistols, reflecting the cruelty that drove them forward. Gideon's finger brushed the trigger. Clara crouched low beside him, watching the enemy with unflinching eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Gideon glanced at her, caught the determination etched into her features. Something shifted in him. The weight of his past, the ghosts he carried, the 12 long years of solitude. Suddenly, it all converged in this one moment. He realized that saving Clara wasn't just an act of protection anymore. It was an opportunity to reclaim the part of himself he had buried with guilt. The first shot rang out from Silas's side, aimed carelessly. But Tobias answered with precision. The canyon erupted into chaos, a symphony of gunfire, shouted commands, and the hiss of arrows from the trees. Clara lunged toward a fallen rider, using her knife to disable him, her movements fluid, deadly. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter molded by pain and tempered by courage. Gideon faced Silas directly, rifle raised, eyes locked on the man who had haunted them both. "This ends now," he growled, voice edged with rage and despair. Silas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You can't save her forever, Callaway. Eventually, everyone pays their debts." Gideon's hand didn't waver. "Not today," he said, and he fired. The shot rang true, knocking Silas off his horse. The other men hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their eyes. Tobias moved forward, enforcing authority, his badge shining faintly in the afternoon sun. "Back, all of you. Territory law doesn't allow this," he said, voice carrying the weight of justice, old and unforgiving. For the first time in years, Gideon allowed himself to exhale. The danger wasn't gone, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Clara approached slowly, keeping her knife ready, but her gaze met Gideon's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They had survived together. That night, the cabin was quiet. The fire crackled gently, a soft counterpoint to the chaos that had erupted earlier. Clara sat near the hearth, knees drawn to her chest, watching the flames dance. Gideon cleaned his weapons, but this time his movements were less mechanical, more deliberate, as if the act of preparing for violence no longer carried the same weight of inevitability. "You saved me," Clara said softly, breaking the silence. "I didn't save anyone," Gideon replied quietly. "I just stayed long enough to fight." She looked up, meeting his gaze fully. There was no fear now, only a fragile trust. "Maybe that's enough," she said. Over the next days, the ridge returned to its deceptive calm. Gideon and Clara moved in tandem, each learning the other's rhythms, the subtle cues that marked trust, the quiet understanding that no words were necessary to communicate danger or reassurance. Tobias checked in periodically, keeping the fragile balance of law and protection, but leaving them enough space to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Clara began to speak more, fragments of her life, before the camps emerging cautiously. Stories of family, of stolen freedom, of dreams extinguished and then reignited. Gideon listened, not interrupting, letting her control the narrative of her own healing. One evening, after the sun had bled red across the horizon, Clara brought a basket of wildflowers she had picked from a hidden grove. She placed them by the window silently. Gideon didn't comment, only noticed. The next morning, he swept the porch clean. Not because she asked, but because the act felt like redemption, a reclamation of space tainted by violence. The bond between them deepened, unspoken but undeniable. Not love in the conventional sense, not yet, but something steadier, built on shared survival, mutual respect, and the slow unraveling of pain. Weeks passed. Silas's men did not return, and the ridge grew quiet, the threat receding into memory. Yet the scars of the past remained, etched in their bodies and minds. Gideon realized that redemption was not an event, but a series of choices. To protect, to endure, to trust, and to care despite fear. Clara, once broken by cruelty, was learning to reclaim her life, piece by piece, step by step. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Clara spoke. "Do you ever think people are put here, not to save others, but to give them space to save themselves?" Gideon nodded slowly. He didn't answer because words were unnecessary. She understood now, and he understood that she understood. Their silence was no longer heavy. It was shared, a testament to resilience and quiet redemption. In the following days, they worked the land together. She tended the small garden. He repaired fences. They spoke little of their pasts, but in the simple acts, passing a tool, sharing firewood, fetching water, a rhythm formed, a life rebuilt from the ashes of their shared horrors. Then, one morning, as Clara moved through the cabin, she noticed something Gideon had done quietly. Carved two small wooden crosses near the ridge. One bore the initials of her lost family. The other marked simply freedom. Tears glistened in her eyes, unspoken gratitude and grief mingling. She pressed the silver locket she had carried for years into Gideon's hands. "Keep it," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, it belongs to them." "Then let it stay here," she said softly. And somehow it did. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection, shared without words. They drank black coffee, watched the stars, listened to the wind sweeping the hills. The ghosts of their pasts lingered, but no longer dictated their every moment. The cabin, once a refuge from cruelty, became a sanctuary of healing, small victories accumulating day by day. And yet the West remained unpredictable. There would be storms, both literal and figurative. But for now, Gideon and Clara stood together, survivors not just of violence, but of despair. They had faced the darkness, fought through it, and emerged not untouched, but unbroken. If you followed Gideon and Clara's journey from the shadows to redemption, hit the like button, share this story, and subscribe to witness more tales of survival, courage, and the human spirit. In the West, stories don't end. They ride on, carried by the eye, wind and remembered in hearts that refused to surrender. Months passed. The cabin, once silent and heavy, now hummed with life. Clara laughed quietly at something small, almost forgotten, and Gideon smiled in response, tentative, fragile. They worked together, shared their meals, tended the ridge, and watched the sun rise and set. The scars would remain, on skin, on memory, on the soul, but they no longer defined them. In the quiet rhythm of work, trust, and companionship, they found a form of redemption that no gun, no cruelty, and no past could take away. Somewhere beyond the hills, life continued in chaos. But here, on this ridge, Gideon and Clara had found a peace hard won, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the West, hope could survive. And sometimes it could even flourish.